The chalk arch is sitting on the window ledge in my apartment. I brought it home after the first class because I didn't want to leave it. It's been there for 14 months and it hasn't fallen. I check it occasionally. Force of habit. That chalk arch is how I know I'm in the right place. I'm Stephen. 66 years old. Bristol. I've lived most of my life in the same city, which is not something engineers often do. The work takes you places. But Pat was from Bristol, and her family was there, and the city suited us, and so Bristol is where we came back to between projects, and eventually where we stayed. I was a civil engineer for 38 years. Structural work mainly, bridges, retaining walls, the kind of infrastructure that people use without thinking about, and that requires someone to have thought very carefully about it in order for that to be possible. I liked the work, I liked the precision of it, and I liked the fact that the things I worked on were real, in a way that a lot of professional work isn't. You could drive over them, walk across them, see them standing in the landscape, and know that they were there because someone had understood the forces correctly. There's a satisfaction in that kind of concrete, literal result that I found sustaining across a long career. I was married to Pat for 34 years. She was a primary school teacher, which people who knew us both tended to find funny. The engineer and the infant teacher, the person who works in tolerances of millimeters, and the person who works in the tolerances of a 6-year-old's attention span, which are considerably less precise and considerably more variable. She was warmer than me. Funnier, better at talking to strangers, better at most things that don't involve load calculations, if I'm honest. We had 2 children. Emma is 37 and lives in Cardiff with her husband and 2 kids who are my grandchildren and who I miss considerably. Rob is 34 and lives in Vancouver and works in software and is doing well and rings on Sundays. Pat died 3 years after I retired. A stroke. She was 61. She was at home, in the kitchen. And she was gone before the ambulance arrived, and I have made my peace with the quickness of it, in the sense that I understand intellectually that she didn't suffer, and I am grateful for that, and in the sense that the quickness left no time for goodbye, and I am not over that, and don't expect to be. I spent 3 years in Bristol after Pat died. Emma was close and came regularly and was wonderful in the way that daughters are wonderful in these circumstances, present, practical. Not trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, just there. Rob came twice from Vancouver, long trips, expensive, and I told him both times not to come, and he came anyway, which was the right decision. I had friends in Bristol, old colleagues and neighbours, people who had known Pat and who navigated the new situation with varying degrees of grace. Most people are kind. Most people try. The house was the problem, not structurally. It was a solid Victorian terrace that I'd maintained carefully and that wasn't going anywhere. The problem was that it was full of Pat in a way that I couldn't find neutral. Not that I wanted to erase her. I didn't. I don't. But that existing inside the space of 34 years of a shared life, when only one person is left to exist in it, is a particular kind of weight that I found, across 3 years, sitting heavier rather than lighter. Emma suggested I think about moving. Not to Cardiff, she offered, and I love her for offering, but somewhere. A change of scene. She'd been reading things online about people retiring abroad, and she sent me some of them, and I read them with the skepticism of a man who builds things for a living and is not easily sold on things that sound too convenient. Some of them were too convenient, a few of them were not. I started researching Thailand. Not the Thailand of the videos aimed at younger men looking for nightlife. I want to be clear about that, because I know what association people make, and it isn't wrong, but it isn't the whole picture. The Thailand I was looking for was the one that appeared in a smaller category of accounts, quieter, older in average age, more interested in the daily texture of a place than in its entertainment options. Hua Hin kept appearing in this category. Hua Hin is a coastal town on the Gulf of Thailand, about 250 kilometers south of Bangkok. The Thai royal family has had a summer palace there for nearly 100 years, which is the kind of historical fact that shapes a place. It means Hua Hin developed as a Thai retreat rather than as a foreign tourist resort. It means it has a Thai identity that goes deeper than its modern international character. It means that when you're in the town markets and the temples and the residential streets, you're in a place that exists for the people who live there rather than for the people passing through. The beach is good. The food is excellent. Hua Hin is known for its seafood, and the reputation is deserved. The size is manageable, about 100,000 people, not so small that it feels limited, not so large that it loses its coherence. The expat community is there, but not dominant, which mattered to me. I visited for 3 weeks. I approached it the way I would have approached assessing a site, systematically, with a list of things I needed to establish: cost of accommodation, healthcare provision, infrastructure, by which I mean roads and utilities, and the general state of maintenance of the town, which an engineer cannot stop noticing. English availability. The feel of the place at different hours of the day. The feel of the place at 7 in the morning, which is the hour I got up most mornings during the visit, and walked to the fresh market near the town centre, was one of those things you cannot put on a list, but that decides more than the list items do. Hua Hin at 7 in the morning is unhurried in a way that Bristol at 7 in the morning was not unhurried. Not empty. The market was busy, the food stalls were busy, the streets were people going about their lives, but at a pace that suggested time was something you could be inside rather than running against. I noticed this on the second morning and spent the rest of the visit paying attention to whether it was real or was what I was looking for, and therefore what I was seeing. By the end of the 3 weeks I concluded it was real. I went home, sold the Bristol house, and moved to Hua Hin in the March of my 65th year. I found an apartment in a residential area about 10 minutes' walk from the beach and 15 from the town centre. 2 bedrooms. I wanted a room for when Emma visited, and she has visited twice, which has justified it fully. 3rd floor, good cross-ventilation, a covered terrace that faces the morning light and that I sit on for the first hour of every day. The landlord is a Thai man called Kun Somchai, who lives in the apartment below me and who manages the building with the mild authority of someone who has been doing it for 15 years and has seen enough tenants to know the ones who are going to be worth the trouble. He concluded I was worth the trouble by the end of the first month, I think, and has since become someone I'd describe as a friend in the careful way that I use words. Let me give you the numbers because they matter, and I'll give them precisely. Rent, 14,000 baht a month. That's approximately £320 at current rates, though the exchange rate moves, and I'd advise anyone doing this to build in a margin for that movement. Utilities, electricity, water, internet, about 1,800 baht, roughly £40. Food, about 7,000 baht, £160. That includes the market shopping 3 mornings a week, and local restaurants most evenings, and the occasional better meal at one of the seafood places on the front when Emma visits or when I feel like it. I eat well. Pat was a good cook, and I learned from her, and I cook most of my own lunches. Health insurance, comprehensive international policy. This is not optional at my age. I want to be emphatic about that. 8,000 baht, £180. Everything else including transport, which in Hua Hin means a small motorbike that costs almost nothing to run. and the various bits and pieces of daily life about 3,000 baht, £70. Total approximately 33,800 baht a month, about £770. My pension from the engineering career and the state pension combined is £1,280 a month. I have £510 left every month after all costs. The engineering brain finds this structurally sound. But I want to tell you about what happened 6 months in, because what happened 6 months in is the reason I'm telling you this story and not a different one. The first 6 months were what I'd needed them to be: warm, quiet, the absence of the Bristol house and everything it contained. I walked in the mornings and cooked at lunch and ate out in the evenings and slept better than I had in 3 years. The simplicity of the life, the reduction of it to things I could manage alone without the accumulated weight of the marital life, was what the doctor, if there had been a doctor involved, might have prescribed. But somewhere in the 6th month, I started to notice something that I am going to try to describe accurately because I think it's important. I was well. I was resting. I was recovering from something that needed recovering from. And I was beginning, quietly and at the edges, to feel useless. Not dramatically, not in a way that frightened me, just the low-level awareness that the days I was filling were being filled without producing anything. I'm an engineer. I spent 38 years making things that had to be correct because if they weren't correct, people could be hurt. The shift from that to a retirement where the days passed pleasantly and left no particular trace was a shift I hadn't fully accounted for. I walked past a school on a Tuesday morning in my 7th month in Hua Hin, a primary school 50 meters from the market I went to 3 times a week that I had walked past regularly without paying particular attention to. On this Tuesday morning the gate was open and there was a teacher standing in the yard who saw me and did what Thai people do, which is smile and greet regardless of whether they know you. I smiled and greeted back. She asked in good English whether I was a teacher. I said I was an engineer. She said what kind. I said structural, civil, bridges and roads. She looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone making a calculation. She asked if I would like to come and talk to her class. Her name was Ajahn Nit. She taught maths and science to children aged 11 and 12. She had been looking, she told me over coffee in the staff room the following morning when I came back as agreed, for a way to make the abstract principles she was teaching connect to things that were real in the world, and that an actual engineer who had built actual bridges was something that had not previously walked through her gate. I talked to her class that first morning for 40 minutes. I talked about how a bridge stays up, which is in essence a story about forces, about compression and tension, and the way that a structure distributes the load it carries to the ground in a way that keeps it standing. I drew diagrams on the board. I used the wooden ruler from Ajahn Nit's desk to demonstrate the principle of a beam under load. I made a small arch out of pieces of chalk that I balanced against each other and asked them to push on it from the side and watch their faces when it held. 11 and 12-year-old children responding to an engineering demonstration is an experience I had not had in 38 years of engineering and that I am going to struggle to describe without sounding more sentimental than I am. What I'll say is this: the quality of attention in that room when the chalk arch held was the quality of attention that you see in people when something that was previously abstract has suddenly become concrete, when a principle that existed only in a book has demonstrated itself in reality. And that quality of attention is one of the more rewarding things a person can witness if they have spent their career working at the intersection of principle and reality. Ajahn Nit asked if I would come back. I came back. I've been going back every week for 14 months. What started as a single session with one class expanded, gradually and without any grand plan, into something more structured. I work with 3 classes now, 2 mornings a week. We have moved well beyond the original bridge demonstration. We have built model structures from materials I buy at the market, bamboo sticks and rubber bands and small weights and the cardboard from packaging, and tested them to destruction, which is one of the fundamental tools of engineering education and which 11-year-olds find deeply satisfying. We have gone outside and measured things: the school building, the compound wall, the distance across the school pond, using basic geometry that a John Knits class had been taught as abstraction, and that became immediately real when applied to something they could stand in front of and look at. We have talked about why roads have the shape they have, and why roofs are pitched at the angle they're pitched at, and why the bridge on the main road into Hua Hin has the particular structure it has, and what would happen to it if you removed any of its parts. Teaching, real teaching, the kind Pat did for 30 years, and that I am doing a modest and amateur version of, is a form of attention to another person that is unlike other forms. When you're teaching, you're watching continuously, watching to see if the understanding has arrived or if it's being performed, watching for the moment when something clicks, watching for the child who is with you and the child who has drifted and the child who understood it 3 steps ago and needs something harder. You are paying a quality of continuous, genuine attention to other people that I had not paid in the way I was paying it since Pat died, and that I found, without expecting to, deeply restorative. Pat paid that kind of attention for 30 years. I understand her differently now. I understood her differently from the first morning in a John Knits class, and I sat in my apartment that evening with that understanding, and it was a complicated feeling, but it was a good one. There is a boy in the Thursday morning class called Nat. He's 12. He is the child who understood the bridge demonstration 3 steps before anyone else and needed something harder. He built a model bridge in the 2nd week that held more weight than any of the other models, and took it apart and built it again with a modification he thought of himself, and tested the modification and found it improved the load capacity by a factor I wasn't expecting. I told him this. He looked at the bridge and then at me with the expression of someone who has just learned that the thing they've been doing privately and weren't sure was interesting is actually interesting and matters. I know that expression from 38 years of engineering. It's the expression of a person discovering their own aptitude. I spoke to his mother through a John Knits translation at the school's open day in November. I told her what I've told you. She cried. I was not expecting that, and was not entirely certain what to do with it. A John Knit told me afterwards that Nat's father had not been involved in his life for several years, and that having a man pay this quality of attention to what her son was capable of was something she hadn't anticipated, and that the crying was about that and not about anything sad. I went home and cooked lunch and sat on the terrace and thought about Pat and about Nat and about what it means to be in the right place at the right time without having planned to be. Pat would have had something to say about all of this. She always had something to say. She would have found it both expected and unexpected. Expected because she always said I was better with people than I gave myself credit for. Unexpected because she knew I hadn't known that until now. She would have laughed at me kindly for needing to build a chalk arch in front of 11-year-olds to find out something she'd been trying to tell me for 34 years. I think about her every day. In Hua Hin, that happens differently from how it happened in Bristol. In Bristol, it was weighted with the house and the rooms and the objects we'd accumulated together. Here, it's lighter. She comes with me to the school on Tuesday mornings in the sense that the attention I pay the children is attention she modeled for me without my fully understanding what I was observing. She's in my cooking, which she taught me and which I've improved at since I've had to do it alone. She's in the early morning on the terrace when the light is doing what it does over the Gulf and I have my coffee and the day is still entirely possible. Emma visited in November. She came for the open day, which I hadn't planned, but which worked out to coincide. She met a John Knit, and she met Nat's mother, and she sat in on half a morning with the Thursday class. At lunch she said something that I want to record accurately. She said, "Dad, you look like yourself." I asked what she meant. She said, "In Bristol after Mum died you look like a version of yourself. You look like yourself now." I didn't know what to say to that, so I talked about the structural principle of the bridge Nat had built, and she laughed and said, "That's you. That's exactly you," and patted my arm. I'm staying in Hua Hin. This is not a decision that required extensive deliberation at this point. The apartment suits me. Kun Somchai is a good landlord and a reasonable card player, which we established at a neighborhood gathering 3 months in, and which has developed into a semi-regular arrangement on Friday evenings with a group of his friends who treat my presence with the affectionate tolerance of men who know you're not going anywhere. The market in the morning. The terrace, the school on Tuesday and Thursday. Nat on Thursday with whatever he's built or thought of or wants to know. Rob rang last Sunday. He asked how things were. I told him about the session earlier that week where we'd done an experiment with water pressure and pipe diameter, and the children had seen for themselves the relationship between the two, which is one of the fundamental things in engineering and in plumbing and in daily life, and that they had understood immediately once they could see it in front of them rather than read it in a book. Rob listened to all of this and then said, "Dad, are you actually teaching there?" I said in a modest and amateur capacity, yes. He said, "And you're enjoying it?" I said, yes. He said Mum would find this very funny. I said, yes, I know. We both laughed. That was a good Sunday phone call. The chalk arch is still on the window ledge. It hasn't fallen. I check it occasionally. Force of habit.